Hello, everyone. This is the Free American Press with your host, Alexander. Today, we are having Gregersen on the show today. He is the CEO of Silver Bullion Television and the Safe House. Hello, Gregor. Thank you for being on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Alex. It's kind of nice to sort of talk with you because I came to the US, to Oceanside, not too far from where you are, when I was 17 as well. And so it's kind of interesting, that we end up having this interview with you sort of being in California around the same age. So it's great.
Yeah, that's really cool. So how do you like the United States?
Well, I had a really good time. I mean, I was originally German, but I grew up in Italy. And so Italy was nice at the beginning, but, like the education at some point, the Italians really like to look backwards to Roman times. So, I had to learn a lot of Latin and translate the Bellum Gallicum from Caesar from Latin to Italian and back and forth. And it just wasn't fun. And I saw Baywatch on TV. And I thought, hey, California seems to be a good place to go. And so I managed to get an exchange student sort of in high school. But, then we actually ended up buying a condo there and basically staying. And then I spent 12 years in the US. So I came in 93 and I left in 2005. But the county changed a lot in those 12 years. But it was I'm really glad I came. So it was great time.
Yeah, that's definitely pretty cool. So what first got you into holding precious metals?
So very early on, I was interested in finance. So I figured, if I can figure out how to make money work for me, then I don't need to work so much. And that's kind of how I ended up, in finance, and then I worked for a stockbroker, and then I realized that mostly a sales job. So I ended up working on the structured product desk, building derivatives, and that really was so. And then I sort of discovered software engineering, and that kind of led me down to this dual background in finance and software development. And through various countries and career paths, I ended up as a senior data architect in Commerzbank. Commerzbank is the second biggest bank in Germany. And I was basically in the trading room in 2008 when Lehman Brothers went bankrupt. And, I saw the aftermath of all of that from inside the financial system, really at the core of it, of building compliance systems and trading systems and seeing what happens. And, I just saw how fragile the whole system is. And people went out and bought precious metal, and I kind of scratched my head and I thought, then I was reading, books by Mike Maloney, Investing in Gold and Silver, and that made a lot of sense. And by the time I decided to buy some silver, I couldn't get any. And silver kept on falling. At the time, silver went as low as $9.50 or so. But nobody would sell you physical silver, so would only buy it. And so I thought, it's the first deal I went to, I thought it was, not a serious shop. So I made it a mission to find silver. I went to 12 banks and bullion dealers around Frankfurt, which is also the financial capital of Germany. And I finally got a 1 kilo silver bar in the gift shop of the European Central Bank. I had to pay 19% tax and all kind of things, but it was that experience standing there and seeing how fragile this whole financial system really is and what a house of cards it is, because it's all based on trust. And when the trust between banks is gone, and it was almost all breaking down back then in 2008, then if the banks don't trade, they're all going to go bankrupt because they're also interdependent over leverage between each other. I mean, I was one of the guys who built some of these derivatives, so I'm familiar with it. And so from that moment on, after I saw it, it was no longer a matter of understanding it. It was a matter of knowing. It was sort of, in your heart, that the shit is going to hit the fan, and it makes a lot of sense to hold some gold. And silver seemed better than gold, so let me figure out how I can get some silver. And then later I figured, hey, maybe somebody else is interested in it too. And when I went back to Singapore, I realized there wasn't anybody at the time selling silver. So I figured, well, I'll put it under my bed. My background is software engineering, so I knew how to build a website and, with live pricing and live inventory. But I didn't see a reason to have a store because for all I knew, I was the only one who wanted to own silver. So I will just, people would lock in the price and everything, and it would be a really cool, sophisticated system back then. But then I would meet the person at the train station and, give them like 5 bars of silver and say, will give me $6,000. And that's how it started. And so after $800,000 in sales, we kind of figured, okay, it's time to actually get an office and, become more serious. And since then, we had in US dollar terms around $800 million in sales.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, it's become big since then.
Well, that's really cool. So do you think silver and gold is a good way for preserving your wealth?
It is probably the best way because it depends a little bit what you want to do. I mean, some people nowadays are saying Bitcoin, and I've been buying Bitcoin for a long time, and I spent a lot of time convincing people that Bitcoin is not a scam. But now I sort of need to convince people that there's more than Bitcoin in the world. I like to put my wealth sort of outside of the traditional financial system because of the reasons mentioned. And silver and gold is one of the best ways of doing so. It's not as volatile. You can just kind of store it, wait, and say if you're going to have a financial crisis, if you're going to have mass bankruptcies, a currency crisis, any of these events, the value of that gold and silver will go way up. So yes, I see it as a financial insurance. I also see it as a really good investment, long term. Now, short term, you just kind of have to be patient, but it sort of suits me very well. And so the majority of my funds are basically in metals, and now through the company, of course, we own a lot of metal, outright in the company.
Okay, so is there a difference between crypto and silver when it comes to reporting capital gains to your knowledge?
Well, you see, that's the beauty. So I lived in Europe, Germany, Italy, US, Singapore. So I naturally like to compare these systems, and I know all these systems well. I've worked and paid taxes in all of them. And one reason I'm in Singapore is that there are no capital gain taxes here. So,
Okay.
I don't have to pay taxes on either one of those. And it's not so easy when you're a US citizen because the IRS is going to follow you anywhere you go. But if you're not a US citizen and you're living outside the US and you're living in a jurisdiction where there are no capital gain taxes, then essentially it's a non-issue. So if it comes back down to, from a US perspective, I think in theory, I think they're probably considered the same. Then in practice, it kind of comes down to what people are going to do and not do. But again, being in Singapore, it's been very easy for me.
Yeah, so one thing I've learned about Bitcoin is that you're actually taxed for holding it in forms of capital gains. So I was just wondering, do you have to pay taxes on your physical silver once you hold it and have it in your physical possession?
No. So in Singapore, there was a sales tax, like it's called GST here. It's sort of like, a sales tax in California, right? You're 7% or whatever. And in Singapore, it's 7% as well. Not sure what it's in California right now. It keeps on changing. But in 2012, if you buy physical bullion, you still had to pay that tax. But the government essentially recognized gold and silver to be something that they want to make a priority, an investment priority for the country. And so they exempted all gold and silver investment grade bullion from taxation. So there's no capital gain tax, there's no sales tax, there's basically no tax of any kind. 1 second. Yeah, I'm back.
Okay, well so that's the advantage between gold and silver and Bitcoin. You have to pay, the governments get you on the Bitcoin where you have to pay taxes on it, but for gold and silver, once you actually own it, you don't have to pay that.
Again, it depends on where you are. In Singapore, you don't pay taxes on Bitcoin either. because there's no capital gain tax.
Okay, so can you tell us about the safe house?
Yeah, so the safe house is our vault. Now, the reason why we built it is when we started off, when we were still, relatively small, we outsourced, like so many companies do, to commercial vault providers. And you have to understand that my experience in Commerzbank, in 2008, when Lehman Brothers went bankrupt, meant that I was not in this business to sell bullion and maximize my profit. I was in this business to create the best systemic wealth protection possible. Like, how can I figure out that when the shit hits the fan, nothing bad is going to happen to the gold and silver which I store? And so naturally, I would study the storage contracts that I'll be signing. And there were two huge problems. The first one was that when it comes to the insurance, mysterious disappearance was not covered. Meaning that if your gold mysteriously disappears, then it's not insured. And most people are not aware that that's actually a standard clause in the industry. If you ask vaults, what type of insurance you have, oftentimes they tell you, oh, don't worry, you have all risk insurance. What they're not telling you is that all risk insurance just means all risk included unless excluded. And so you need to get the list of exclusion. And one of those exclusions is probably going to be mysterious disappearance, which is a catch-all. And, I thought that we want to have mysterious disappearance covered because I can't very well tell my customers, if your gold mysteriously disappears, then, too bad for you. So that was, and the only way to change your insurance is to build your own vault, because the insurance is tied to the vault and the vault operators. So that's one reason why we had to build a new vault. The second reason was when you there are force majeure clauses in these contracts. And force majeure means if something happens that is out of the control of you and the vault, and that's normally has to do with like, an earthquake, a natural disaster, or a government nationalizing your gold, then this clause will say what happens. And these contracts basically had a force majeure clause which says that if any government, and remember, we were in Singapore, so if any government anywhere in the world nationalizes, confiscates, or otherwise, takes said bullion, you cannot sue the vault operator.
Okay.
And my point is, hey, I'm in Singapore, so I okay to have that clause if it's the Singapore government doing it. But based on the way this clause is defined, if Burundi says that they want to nationalize my gold, then you can do that and I cannot sue you. I mean, what sort of clause is that? And of course, there's always the fear that the United States might sue, so or nationalize. So this was the other reason why we had to build our own vault, because the only way to remove that dependency from somebody else, from having that counterparty risk, is to build your own vault. And if you build your own vault, you basically make sure that we are just located in Singapore and we have no real jurisdictional exposure back to the United States or Europe or anywhere else. And because I believe Singapore is a very good place and a very trustable government, I only want to be responsible towards Singapore and not any government outside. And so these two reasons basically was why we had to build our own vault. And it's a long story, but essentially that's the reason why we did it back then. And we then ended up developing a lot more things, such as testing labs to make sure that we know the bullion is real and not, coated tungsten. Yeah. And we store it in a much more transparent way with photos and audits and other things. So we basically just figured, how can we do it right? And was the last 10 years, basically, we kept on improving these systems. We kept on asking people, so what's wrong with what we're doing? What are you thinking? And, we had a lot of paranoid customers who kept on telling us, oh, you need to do this. And that's sort of what our strength has become, is that transparency. It's the only way to do it is to have your own vault. So that's why we built the vault. And as you might know, our original facility has become too small. And basically now we bought a huge building, which we are now going to start to renovate soon.
Wow, that's really cool that your company is transparent. That's a really good thing. So what do you think of this recent news? So according to AP News, quote, U.S. Secretary Janet Yellen on Monday urged the adoption of a minimum global corporate income tax, an effort to at least partially offset any disadvantages that might arise from the Biden administration's proposed increase in the U.S. corporate tax rate, end quote. So is this really offsetting disadvantages, or is it making them?
Look, it's like the US saying, we're going to increase our taxes. Why can't everybody else increase their taxes too? Because we want our companies to stay in the US and not move somewhere else. The reality is, well, the United States is very powerful. You know, it's more like an advice. You know, it's kind of like saying, you shouldn't cross the street if it's red, and you know, some people still want to do it. You're not going to get the world to get together and increase their taxes just because Yellen says you should do it. So I think in practice, there might be some countries, especially in Europe, which have higher taxes anyway. So they're going to say, "This is great." I mean, yeah, definitely, because they want the lower taxation jurisdictions, to increase their taxes. Singapore, we are paying 17% for corporate taxation. So US was, I think, 21, right? And so went up to 28 now.
Yeah.
But the thing is, in the US, in Singapore, they managed to, take 17%, and they have a surplus most years.
Oh,
So,
okay.
there's just such a much more efficient sort of way of handling the money. So why should they increase it that much? So I would say it's just not going to happen.
Yeah,
I think it's more like a signal that the US would like to see people raise their taxes, but that's all it is.
Okay. And would you agree that less taxing sovereign nations like Singapore and many others across the world, would they try to deny the United States this power? Would they try to secure their sovereignty?
Oh yeah, of course. I mean, it's like somebody saying, "Yeah, we should raise taxes." I was like, "Okay, well, we take note of it." Think, countries are not going to. I mean, unless the US is going to start saying, "Well, I'm going to, start bombing, every country which doesn't increase taxes by 3% or something." But again, it doesn't make any sense either. It's all very self-defeating. It's just a statement which is kind of blown out, and it doesn't really have much repercussions at the end of the day. I think what might happen is, in Europe, there's Ireland, which basically has a reputation of being one of the lowest taxation countries in Europe. And in Europe, if you are in a European country, you get access to the whole market. So it makes a lot of sense to go to whichever country has the lowest tax rate. And that's Ireland. So a lot of European countries like Germany and France and Italy and everybody else is like forcing Ireland, you need to raise taxes, you need to raise taxes. But at the end of the day, it's their sovereignty. And, if a country starts following Yellen's advice on doing this, and what's they going to do next? Nobody can walk, more than 5 steps without turning right, and everybody's going to do that too. I mean, no, it really doesn't have much significance. With maybe say what the US might do from a policy point of view is go to a few countries which have no taxes and try to put pressure on them to change it. But the announcement itself, no, it doesn't have that much effect.
Okay, so I want to ask you a little bit more about crypto versus silver. So one of the things I want to see if you agree with this statement. So one of the things that I see with crypto is that it's centralized because it's on the internet and governments can easily track and trace, what you buy, especially with the Fed coin or with the Chinese government and their digital currency. While silver, it's out of the, out of their whole thing. It's its own thing. It's physical. It can be out of the system. So do you think silver is more decentralized than crypto because it's not part of their system?
I think there's a lot of confusion when people talk about crypto because, it can be implemented in so many different ways. And a blockchain can be public or it can be private. So if the Federal Reserve or China is making a national currency, those are not public blockchains. These are, controlled blockchains, which basically don't share any of the distributed features of, say, Bitcoin or something like this. So you have to make a very big distinction here. If you're looking at truly distributed blockchains, say you take Bitcoin or you take Ethereum, and I mean, some of them like Monero, they're going all the way trying to make it like as untraceable as possible. But I would say they are more distributed than Bullion, because Bullion or physical silver, you have to put it somewhere. You have to put it in a jurisdiction. So if, for example, in the United States, you're putting your silver under your bed and they're going to nationalize gold like they did in 1933, and now they have to turn in your silver and your gold, otherwise it's like cocaine. You have the problems that you need to keep that gold or silver somewhere, you need to do something with it. With a Bitcoin address, nobody really knows unless you report it that address is yours, and you can just move it somewhere else. And all you need to know, I mean, Bitcoin, you basically, if you have your private key, it's yours. If you don't have your private key, it's not yours. If somebody else's private keys, it'll take it from you. So it's so incredibly simple at the end of the day. And the system is so transparent because, remember, things like Bitcoins, everything is open source. So you can see the rules and nobody can change the rules. And for listeners who don't know this, a bank is an example of an extremely centralized system, just like a central bank. But if you go to a bank and you want to make an account, what's going to happen is they're going to go check you out and blah, blah, blah. And then if they approve you, they're going to give you a bank account. And they're going to ask you, put a password in so you can access that account. You see, with Bitcoin or crypto, a distributed open source public ledger, it's the opposite. There is no entity you can go to. What you're doing instead is you come up with your password first, you run it through an algorithm, and you basically, out of that, you get the address. So you create a password, out of the password comes an account, which is uniquely tied to your password. And nobody knows what that is. And until you transfer funds to it, it doesn't even exist. It's only once you transfer funds to it that it exists. So in such sense, Bitcoin and so on has more distributed sort of features than physical gold is. But if you look at a centralized, or a private blockchain, which is run by the Fed or something else, then it's not really what people consider a blockchain. It's just a complicated database. So that's why, when people use the word blockchain in crypto, it can mean so many different things. And that's why this distinction is so important.
You do agree, though, that the government is starting to tax, Bitcoin and other forms of cryptocurrency, right? Or what do you agree with that?
Of course. Crypto, let me put it this way, is a threat. The banking system is in trying to shut down Bitcoin blockchain systems and so on. They make it extremely difficult for liquidity providers to convert, say, Bitcoin into US dollars or the other way around. And that's why you ended up with something like Tether, the stable coins. And these stable coins, I think they're terrible because there's no proof of any backing behind it. So, so in the crypto world, if you ask me, I think a stable coin like Tether, I would never buy something like this. Bitcoin might be the one thing which, having a little bit might not be such a bad idea. But just like it can go up, 20 times, it can also fall 90% very quickly. So it's very, very volatile. When it comes to the taxation of all these things, you see, you can vote by voting for a representative, or you can vote by going to another country and get a different set of tax rules, like I did. So there's a big world out there, and you can kind of choose what system you want to be in. And if you are in the US, you just have to follow the US system. And if the US says, we're going to tax this, and we're going to tax that, at some point they might nationalize gold and silver, right? I mean, you never know which directions that goes. You have many choices in life. Sometimes people just aren't aware of all the choices that are out there.
Okay, so do you think the conversion rate between dollars and precious metals is being kept artificially low?
Silver is definitely manipulated, yeah. But it's more complex than that. So the reason why I'm saying it's manipulated, and it doesn't necessarily mean it's a concerted effort just to keep it low versus the dollar. But throughout the last 12 years, we had many cases where silver would fall, say 20, 30%, for no good reason in a short period of time. It will start on Monday morning Asia time, because that's the thinnest traded. That's when there's the least amount of trading up in Tokyo. And, but because the price of silver is not determined with physical prices, but is determined in future exchanges, and future exchanges are highly leveraged, somebody can come in and basically just try to push down the price and basically sort of have margin calls on all the people which have long position, kills the smaller guys and push the price down, and eventually buy it back at a higher price and make a bunch of profit.
Okay, so
I think silver should be much higher, but the question sometimes is, what should be the value of the dollar be, as opposed to what should the value of silver be? And with so much dollars being printed, the question is, why is the dollar still worth so much? Right? Why is it, if we double the amount of dollar circulation, why did it halve in value? And the answer to that is the velocity of money, which basically means, because people don't spend it, because they're going to buy stocks with it. And that's why the stock market keeps on going higher and higher, even though the real economy is in the doldrums. But once these people start buying cars with it, or pretzels, or anything else, the price of everything else is going to start skyrocketing. And so that's when the dollar is really going to fall. So, once we start talking about the relationship, one of it is sort of the tactical side of silver. The other one is the bigger strategic side of what the value of the dollar should be. And a lot of that is psychological. I look at it like it's like a dam, like a dam with water behind. And every time they print money, they add more and more pressure to that dam. And at some point, that dam is going to break, and all that energy is going to be released. And, the US dollar as fiat currency is just going to probably go eventually the way the Weimar Republic did with the German D-Mark. And, and that's when having gold or silver is going to be, really, really important. And I guess one difference with Bitcoin is the government has an easier time banning Bitcoin. Gold and silver, it's harder to ban. The government doesn't have a way of stopping Bitcoin, but it can stop every US company from accepting it as payment, right? And then what's the value of it? So there are plus and minus on both sides. I prefer to have my money in physical silver and gold, but I'm keeping a little bit of Bitcoin, and I'm not against it. I'm against many of the other cryptos because there's a lot of fraud out there.
Okay, so what are your thoughts on the Independent Precious Metals Authority, Lbma, based in London, England?
Thoughts in what way? I mean, I kind of know the CEO. I've been at a number of events and so on. For them, they have a useful role in that they certify refineries and so on, and they set minimum standards. And so that provides a certain amount of I guess, quality out there. But then, of course, there's also some politics which will come in, because there's some companies like Sunshine Mint, I don't know if you're familiar with them, but they are one of the main producers of blanks for the US Mint, who makes American Eagle coins. And they're not an Lbma member. And as far as I can tell, the only reason is that yes, other members don't want them to become Lbma members. So I think in the big scheme of things, it probably doesn't have a huge impact in most countries. In Singapore, it has a certain importance because the government didn't want to make jewelry tax-free, but it wanted to make investment-grade gold tax-free. And so you have to make a rule, what is taxable as jewelry and what is an investment-grade bar. And so because, you know, a lot of the investment world uses the Lbma as a standard. In Singapore, if you have an Lbma approved a bar, which from an approved refiner, then you don't pay taxes as a 7%. Otherwise, you have to pay taxes. So for us, it's important to buy gold and silver from a refinery. We're actually a bonded facility, so we don't have to pay taxes anyway. But as soon as you take it out of the vault, you would have to pay taxes. So it's easier to just get Lbma refinery type of silver and gold. But yeah, that's kind of what my view of the Lbma is.
Okay, so why does the Lbma, in conjunction with the 77 largest financial corporations in the world, including some precious metal companies, like you said, such as JP Morgan AG, get to decide the price of gold and silver each day?
I don't think it's the Lbma so much. It's the Lbma has a, okay, the Lbma has a fix, right? There's a morning fix and the evening fix, where they say as of 11 o'clock, the fix is this and this. And the fix is useful for insurance purposes, to say the price of silver was this price, you know, for the day, as opposed to having the spot rate, which keeps on moving. So the spot rates, they're set in the future contracts. I guess somebody has to set it. The problem I'm having is that the rules of the future contracts, I think the shady sort of part of the system is really COMEX and the future contracts, where you can leverage and you can borrow non-existing silver, leverage it 10 times and sell it. And you know, and there's so little physical silver, you know, to back the net long position. So that system is what I think is broken and wrong. So how much the Lbma has a role in that, to my understanding, they're not playing a huge role in that. So I don't see the Lbma as sort of being really that much of a bad player in it. It's just the way the system is, which needs to be changed. And since they're going to be big banks or other big financial traders, which are going to game the system and take advantage of it by doing big shorts, like, you know, I was mentioning earlier and so on. And generally, basically, our problem is that the prices are not determined by physical supply and demand. They're determined by whatever these guys do into future exchanges. But the way I look at it, I'm looking at the long term. If the price of silver is low, I'm just going to stack more silver up, and, you know, it's giving me opportunity to sort of get more and more of it. And when things finally going to explode, because at some points they have to, that's what I realized back in 2008, then, you know, it's going to be better for people which are able to pick that up. And once enough people are starting to buy silver, because there isn't that much physical, you're going to run out of the industrial type of silver, which say Intel and Tesla and all the other guys need. And that's really when prices are going to start skyrocketing. And but we are not there yet. But, you know, at some point, people are going to need to have that silver, and they're going to be willing to pay, you know, prices which are going to be a lot higher than what the COMEX and so on is going to have, because they won't have the silver for delivery, or not enough of it.
So basically what you're saying, the Lbma gets to decide like the ceiling for silver for a day, like it can't go over $30 an ounce today, is what you're trying to say, right?
No. What the fix is, they don't set any limit on that. Again, the prices are determined, say, in different future exchanges. They change across the day. So the London bullion market, right, is one of them. Then you have COMEX and so on. The Lbma itself, what they do is they just decide that the price of silver at 11 o'clock London time is going to be 21 and 52, also in 52 cents instead of 21 and 50 cents.
Okay.
And that's basically all they're doing. So it's like setting at this time, that's the official price. And so it's just a matter of, you know, which cent is here and there. And the reason why it's a big deal if you have, say, a really large customer, right, and he wants to buy $10 million worth of silver, you have to give them a really low margin. Now, if we cannot agree on what the price of silver is, because you're going to Kitco and you get one price of silver, and you're going to, I don't know, CNN or whatever, and you're going to get a slightly different price. And it keeps on changing over time. So maybe my data is delayed by 5 seconds or 30 seconds. This guy is going to say it's 21 and 52. I'm going to say it's 21 and 48. And, these are all problems. So to remove all of these issues, that's what the silver fix is. That's one in the morning, once the evening. And we just say, okay, we're going to decide on the price, but whatever the Lbma tells us, it is at that point in time.
Okay, yeah. So do you think the free market can better set that price than an organization such as the Lbma?
Sure, there are better ways of doing it. I guess just a traditional way. I think there are companies which kind of came up with some algorithms of doing it. At the end of the day, I mean, nowadays, you could probably just use a computer and say at exactly 1150 is going to be that price. But then, of course, it's a bit more complicated than that, because knowing that that's going to be the price, and knowing that there might be big deals happening at that price, some parties might try and push up or push down the price to make that difference. So there are some complications. Could it be better? Probably. But the question is who should do it, instead of the Lbma, basically. But this fix really is a matter of cents. It's not an upper and a lower limit. I think the bigger problem is just this leveraged selling of non-existing silver, which pushes down the price by a lot more than a few cents.
Yeah, what I was kind of thinking is that maybe it would be better for it to be more decentralized, where companies could set their own prices for gold and silver, and if people wanted to buy their gold and silver, then they could pay their price. So, do you think, therefore, the Lbma is the main entity behind the manipulation of silver and gold in the world today?
No, it wouldn't be the Lbma. People, it might be wealthy traders on comics. It might be banks and so on. I don't think it's the Lbma itself. But coming back to what you're saying is how you set a price. It's called price discovery, basically. And what it comes down to is, if I need to buy silver, right, and if the dealer or the refinery, wherever I can get the silver, is going to use, say, an Lbma-based price to set the silver, for example, it's going to be that price, because I can get the silver at that price. If I buy it somewhere at a lower price, I will definitely buy it, but I will buy it all up, and I will sell it to somebody else, and I'll earn this difference. You see, so the market ultimately is going to have to converge to one price, and that one price always comes down to, if I pick up the phone and I'm buying 20 tons of silver, am I reasonably certain to get it? So until the answer is yes, it's going to be the system. But if they ever default, or if there's a perception that I'm not sure I'm going to get that silver, then I might start having a different price, and then things get interesting. And so, it's something that's going to get very interesting once you see a big financial crisis happening, because then a lot of people are going to want to have the physical, and comics might not be able to deliver on some of these promises, and then you might end up having different prices and arbitrage, and different locations might have different prices. And so what you're saying might very well be happening, and we might be moving to a new system, but it has to be part of a shock to the system. And yeah.
So do you think the Lbma is basically a union for the biggest corporations in the world, as the 77 members on that membership list that I was looking on their website? There's Bank of China, JP Morgan, the bank in Toronto, Canada, as well, some of the biggest financial institutions. and refining companies, like you were saying. So do you think this is just some sort of union?
Yeah, I mean, we are part of something called the Singapore Bullion Market Association, and there are also a bunch of banks in there. And the reality is, there's going to be a meeting once per year, and nobody really decides on anything. Like, we want to have the physicals, the banks, they just want to have paper. We just kind of look at each other, go through the AGM meeting, blah blah blah, and kind of go home, and nothing happens. It's really just an association to it was created because if you're talking with the government as a company, you're always going to have a hard time talking with the government, because if company X is going to speak with the government, then saying, oh, we should not have taxes on silver, then the government is always going to say, oh, this is like a private favor to sort of that company. But if you have an association, and the member association can sort of get together and say, as an association, we think this and this should happen, then that's sort of where that purpose is coming from. I think that these companies, a lot of these members in there, they're competitors. They're not really sharing much connection. I'm not saying these are necessarily good guys or are doing things for the good of the world, but I don't think that they're sort of in cahoots to push the price down or up. Some of them want the price to be a lot higher, especially some mines, right? Some other ones, they just kind of look at opportunistic and they're gonna short it because they see a way of making money right now on it. So it's much more chaotic, I think, than people can realize sometimes.
Yeah. So you think companies like JP Morgan and Bank of China need to be part of an association so they can talk to the government?
That's not what I think. That's just kind of what it is, in Singapore. That's kind of what
Okay.
happened.
Oh, in Singapore. Okay. So you were just talking about Singapore. So do you think we should go back to the gold standard for the entire world?
We don't get to decide that, you see. It's
Well,
something.
if you could decide, what do you think on that? Do you think we should?
I think it would be good, because at the end of the day, what a gold standard does, it prevents countries from just printing humongous amount of money. It keeps governments honest to some degree. And I think one of the biggest problems we have nowadays is that the young generation, you 17 years old, you're paying into Social Security. I paid into Social Security for 3 years. I'm not going to get anything back. I paid into the German pension system. I'm not going to get anything. It's a pay-as-you-go systems. These politicians, they're all spending our future and leaving only debts, and then finding ways of printing more and more funds because it's the easiest thing to do. And so they're basically destroying our future. Oftentimes, sometimes they might not even realize by what degrees they're doing it because it becomes so normal. It's just printing us $1 trillion. So having a way of preventing that, and by basing it with gold, and there's the Keynesians and so on, which might say, oh, it will cause the economy not to grow and all this bullshit. Well, the reality is we did really well with the gold standard. And
yeah, I agree.
And the other thing is what's really killing, I think, productivity nowadays is the opposite. It's we're creating too much money. And whenever there's a recession, the Federal Reserve just lowers interest rates to almost nothing, starts printing more money. And so companies which ought to be going bankrupt, they're not going bankrupt. And so they're not making space for more efficient companies to come up. So I'm very, very much agree that the current system sucks, which is one of the reasons I left the US, which is one of the reasons I left Germany and left Italy, looking for something else. And, going back to some form of gold standard to keep the government from printing so much, I very much welcome that, yeah.
Okay, well, that's great. So how is the lockdown going in Singapore right now?
Well, we had a lockdown back in August, so about 10 months ago, 8 months, for about 6 weeks or something like this. But since then, basically, they have almost no cases here left, so life is almost normal. A lot less tourists, but the malls are full. Singaporeans just keep on going to the mall or other place or restaurants. So it seems relatively normal. It's just traveling, which is harder.
Okay. So for our last question, at what point can an investor plan to determine when to sell gold and silver to pay off debt?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I guess it depends how much debt you have and what interest rate you're paying. So from a strategic point of view, right? I mean, let me put it this way. If you can pay rent tomorrow because you're having too much metal and you're too risky, gold and silver might go down 20, 30, 40%. And, if you're highly leveraged, don't do that, because you might end up being right and gold and silver might go through the roof, but before it does, it might go down 50%. You might lose everything. So if you're taking on debt to buy gold, don't over leverage yourself. And it might take a lot longer than you think. It took a lot longer than I thought. I thought by now, we would have had a much bigger crisis because of all of this. So on the other hand, if the US dollar really is going to start losing value, then borrowing money is kind of smart. But it also depends how much interest rate you're going, and again, how much risk you're taking on. So it becomes a balance like this, and then it becomes a personal preference. I prefer to have very little debt, just because I don't try to optimize things as much. I just kind of take the silver and gold, put in a safe place. Don't even look at the price so much, and just keep on accumulating. And if prices go down, I don't have to worry about something going wrong and so on. So
Yeah, I think
yeah.
you're definitely right, because eventually the dollar will return to its intrinsic value, which is zero, and then gold and silver has got to be what's worth, actual wealth, like you're saying. So can
Yeah,
you?
and
Go on.
Ray Dalio, he's a really interesting read. So I really recommend, his books. He's an amazing sort of guy. But he had this really interesting chart where he shows the life of reserve currencies. Starting with the Spanish Empire, going to the Netherlands, the French, the British, and now the US dollar. And on average, they last 75 years. And depending when it started, it was 1920 or Bretton Woods back in 1945. Well, you add 75 years to 75 and you end up 2020. So nobody knows when this is going to happen, because all of it's psychological, but you can keep on printing money out of nowhere in the amounts that's being happened and expect things to keep on going well. So at some point it's all going to blow up, and putting some wealth in gold and silver, I think it's one of the best things you can do. And even if I'm wrong, gold went up 8% on average since 1971.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome.
So say I'm wrong and your earnings that, it's not like gold will ever go to zero. It's not like some risky stock. And it's not like Bitcoin, which might go to zero. Gold is not going to go to zero. So, or silver. So that's why, it's something that you should put money in and wait.
Yeah. So can you tell the viewers where they can find you?
Sure. So easiest way is silverbullion.com.sg, just like the bullion. I started the company back then. I figured I call it Silver Bullion. People will find me for silver, and it says .sg is the country extension, so it's Singapore. Have a look. We have a lot of different things we do, including peer-to-peer loans and other things that are quite interesting.
Well, I thank you for being on the show, Gregor, and I hope we can have you on the show again.
Yeah, definitely. I enjoyed talking.
Thank you.